So Don't Worry Darling has been one of the most discussed and notorious movies of 2022, and very little of that actually has to do with the movie itself. And if not for everything happening outside this movie, I think it probably would have just been seen as fine. Because that's what it is. It exists in this very frustrating place where there are some really good core ideas, imagery, and performances, but then like the execution falls flat. Actually, flat is kind. It is a mess. It is nowhere near the worst movie I saw this year, but it's kind of up there with disappointing movies I saw this year. Because before the drama started swirling around this, I was so excited. I am a huge Florence Pugh fan. I've loved pretty much everything she's ever been in, and if I'm not huge on the movie, her performance is still amazing. And that doesn't change here. It feels like she's one of the few people who understood what this movie should have been going for. And I was a huge fan of Booksmart, and all the interviews I saw with the cast made it sound like Olivia Wilde was like really amazing to work with and had like a real eye for certain directorial things, so I was excited to see her follow-up. But I'm also a big fan of weird thriller dramas. All the pieces were there. But my god, they came together like a toddler trying to slam a puzzle into place. I'm not gonna go through the complete drama because it's been a couple months now. I assume a lot of it is not valid, but it was wild. And you know what else is wild? The deals coming from today's sponsor, Raycon. Raycon's everyday earbuds are my go-to for listening to music, audiobooks when running errands, punching the bejesus out of this Cobra bag, or just doing things around the house. With 8 hours of playtime, a 32-hour battery life, compact fit, and a variety of colors, Raycon are guaranteed to have the perfect pair for you, and as always, they'd like me to remind you that they start at about half the price of other premium audio brands. They also have a selection of headphones and speakers to round out your audio pleasures. But with Black Friday around the corner, the deals are better than ever. Whether you need a pair for yourself or a loved one going into the holiday season, you can save 20% by going to buyraycon.com/Jedi and using code EARLYBF. And if you need multiple gifts, you can save 30% by shopping some of their exclusive holiday bundles. I personally dig the All-Star bundle, which comes with the everyday and fitness earbuds. They have a variety of deals coming through the season, so make sure to click the link in the description down below or head over to buyraycon.com/Jedi to keep an eye out for the best deals. But yeah, this movie has had a pretty constant slew of bad press. There's rumors that like the cast all had issues with each other, people thinking that Harry Styles spit on Chris Pine, and that's just scratching the surface. I assume that there's a truth somewhere in the middle, but a lot of the headlines just grossly exaggerated what was actually being said by people. But the spitting, I don't think that happened. I slowed that shit down. I don't see any spit. What a world we live in. But Don't Worry Darling has gone through a lot of changes. There's the original script that was formulated by the Van Dyke brothers back in 2019, which was then revised to a version much closer to what we got in the movie by Kate Silberman. And then finally how that morphed into what we actually got on screen. So let's just kind of cruise through this movie so I can get to the areas where I feel it fumbled and what it changes from the original script. Because I genuinely believe that there is a version of this movie that could work. I also feel like they probably shot enough footage to make the version of this movie that works. Florence Pugh and Chris Pine absolutely understand the assignment and just knocked it out of the park. It looks amazing and there's some like really interesting ideas. But just know that a shortened version of this movie could be a Black Mirror episode. A shortened version of this movie basically is a Black Mirror episode, just with way too much wild symbolism flying around instead of just spending time on the interesting stuff, which ultimately results in a movie that simultaneously felt way too long and way too short. So Don't Worry Darling is set in an idyllic 1950s town. Alice and Jack live in a community in which each of the husbands work on the top secret Victory Project while the wives tend to the homes and get to enjoy all the luxuries and safety that this manufactured desert town has to offer. And the entire town is run by Frank, a man who all the husbands seem to worship. He uses language like a surgical tool, but the women are never allowed to know what actually happens at the Victory Project, so it kind of feels a little bit like the Manhattan Project. Not only can they not know, they're also actively discouraged from even discussing it.
What do you think they're really doing out there? Peter insinuates that they're actually making weapons. Discovered.
But cracks seem to appear in this seemingly perfect world that allude to something sinister lurking beneath the surface. And even without those cracks, the whole thing already feels like a cult. The way the men revere Frank almost like a god, these weird red jumpsuit employees acting like thumb-thumbs, and everything in this town is in service of the Victory Project, which is kind of weird when most of the population has no idea what it even is. But Alice and Jack seem like the perfect couple. They're They're young, attractive, passionate, Jack's doing super well at his job, and Alice seems to have a prominent place in the social ladder. They also seem to agree on not wanting kids yet because they're just too obsessed with each other, which is like the first major change from the original script. Which is weird considering it's the 1950s, and in the original script she was purposely sabotaging herself from getting pregnant because she didn't want to be. In that original script, Jack is also significantly less doting and more demanding. Alice is pretty annoyed with him. It feels a lot less like a partnership. But the cracks in that perfection start very early on, with the crack of an egg with nothing inside it. Then she keeps having these little flashes of dancers, little blips throughout her day, making it clear that something isn't right, but it just takes way too long to get to what specifically isn't right. Other than those weird glitches, it seems like it might not even be a major twist, just that this is some kind of cult with weird expectations. I really got that vibe when, at a party, Jack sneaks into Frank's room and looks at his ties as if they're these great artifacts, and then just starts finger blasting Alice because he's just so turned on by the power or something. Which, fucking weird enough as it is, but then Frank walks in on them and just stands there smirking at Alice, and for some reason she doesn't say anything. In the script it's because she's just kind of shocked, but then he doesn't say anything, and then Jack notices and stops, and it's just kind of played off as like, shoulda knocked. Nah, you two kids have fun. Good job, Jackie boy. Here they just keep going. So that combined with the trailer vibes made me think, hey, maybe this is some kind of weird sex cult where Frank can make claims to any woman he wants, but no. Though finding out the Pine Watch documentary about Nexium and Keith Raniere, a literal sex cult and its leader, really backs up those vibes. And as the little glitches start to add up, we learn about her neighbor Margaret, who apparently wandered into the desert towards the Victory headquarters with her son, and by the time people found her, her son was completely gone outside of his red toy plane. Then one day she sees a plane crash in the desert, a plane that looks a lot like that toy. But when she runs out into the desert to try to help, not exactly sure what she thought she could do, she doesn't find it, but she does find what we assume is the Victory office. And when she touches it, suddenly she's just flashing through dilated pupils. There's blood on a slide, the distant sound of Frank's voice talking about people craving order. Flashes of her with the man, presumably Jack, in a seemingly different setting with subdued colors, before she suddenly wakes up back in bed. I'd also like to point out that in the revised script, she wakes up to Alice in Wonderland on the TV. I'm guessing they couldn't get the rights for that, and maybe they felt it was a little bit too on the nose, but I did think that would be some nice symbolism, like her name's Alice, her best friend's name is Bunny. But in both the revised script and the movie, she wakes up to Jack cooking, but the attitudes are very different. In the movie, it's really sweet. He's like, hey, I assumed you weren't feeling well and wanted to try to make you a nice, like, 5-course roast dinner. But in the script, it was more of like, well, you were asleep, so I had to fend for myself. Oh, you're good to cook now? A steak would be great. Which in my opinion was the better angle. But obviously she mentions the plane, he just kind of jokes it off, so she assumes it must have been a dream. But then there's another weird moment with a glitch.
You love me.
The most.
So again, she has one of these weird little flashes that seems like them in another life and responds in the same way, which is a clue to the audience, but it goes deeper. The way he poses the question, it's not about what he feels for her, it's about him knowing how she feels for him. More on that later. But things just keep escalating. There's more glitches, the walls literally start closing in on her, and then Margaret slits her throat and jumps off her roof. I feel like they ran the cameras and were like, do the Midsommar thing, but then like look away really quick. But the second Alice tries to go and help, the red suits are on her, dragging her away. And then everyone's trying to convince her that Margaret just slipped while cleaning windows and is gonna be just fine. But she knows what she saw, and the more she tries to push things and say that something isn't right with Frank and Victory, the more Jack pushes back. So she ends up getting prescribed medicine by the good doctor here and is told that Margaret is getting very extensive help, and it's meant that her husband Ted is no longer part of the Victory Project. Kind of like a looming threat, get in line or lose everything. Which makes it seem all the more realistic that Margaret was right, that they took and did something to her son to punish her for her indiscretions. I'd like to note that in the movie they turned down the prescription, but in both scripts she is supposed to be taking pills daily but doesn't.
She doesn't need those. We can handle it ourselves.
So at this point, she's very certain that Frank has done something to them and has them trapped here for reasons she doesn't quite understand. But her reality is crumbling more and more by the day. She can't get these images out of her head. She has flashes back to conversations about Jack getting another job, which is most likely trying to lead the audience down the path that Jack might have gotten himself caught up in something out of desperation to try to get a job. But again, the lighting and the style of the shot instantly looks different from what the movie's set up so far. Also, astute viewers may have noticed one of her blips was a Sylvia Plath book. Plath didn't publish anything under her name until after her death in the late 60s, so not the 50s here. But she completely shatters when Jack gets a major promotion and just starts doing this lovely marionette dance, desperately trying to get Bunny to believe her about everything she's been seeing.
Stole from Dr. Collins?
Because Margaret can't be a hold of yourself, Alice!
But we immediately get the vindication that she's right because Frank seems to know that she's not trusting him and calls her out as a worthy adversary at her dinner party, but I think that was mostly just bait to try to get her into overreacting in front of everyone.
I'm sorry Bunny didn't believe you. My God, you fascinate me. No great man has changed the course of history without being pushed to the limits of his potential. And you push me. And yet here you are, preparing dinner like a good girl.
So she starts to call him out at dinner, usurps the head of the table, starts pointing out that everyone met their partners in similar ways, they all vacation in the same places, honeymooned in similar locations, and all come from the same 3 or 4 cities, none of which are anywhere near Victory.
We met on a train.
To Boston.
Yes.
You dropped your ticket, and he bent down, picked it up, gave it to you, right?
And the big one, no one remembers anything about their lives before getting to Victory outside those curated memories. All great points, but it's not the right scenario for it. She escalated everything way too quickly, and Frank literally talks for a living. So he immediately manages to flip this on her having a psychotic break.
Jack, I think you may have overserved your wife. I was expecting so much more from you.
So the whole evening blows up and Alice is just desperately begging Jack to leave town with her, assuming that whatever is going on will stop if they just drive away. And at first it seems like he's actually going to listen to her and leave, but it was just a setup to have her taken away by the thumbs and set off for some good old electrotherapy reprogramming, which flips back to more memories, a significantly less clean-cut Jack, the rest of the conversation where he's worried about being able to take care of her because he lost his job, before the doctor above her becomes her. And instantly we're cut to the modern world where she's a surgeon. So that's the twist. They are in a 1950s simulation. But it shows her getting home to Jack, who's watching a YouTube video by Frank. Most likely content designed to reach out to men who feel discontent with their lives. So he's upset that she's late, but she's obviously exhausted because she just worked 30 hours in the OR, only to come home to him whining about having not eaten yet because she didn't text him back because she was in surgery.
Surgery ran really long.
Well, I'm starving. I haven't eaten.
Look, I get it. Different relationships need different things to prosper, and some people need a lot of attention and wouldn't be able to handle having a partner who's so very regularly busy. But my guy, just cook some damn food. Like, they clearly have problems because she looks exasperated by his texts, but can you blame her if he just sits around doing nothing all day when she's pulling 30-hour shifts? And he stays up after she goes to bed listening to this man talk about how modern society is smothered reality and thwarted biological destiny. Oh no, it's the pipeline! But it cuts to her waking up in that 1950s hospital and luxuriously being brought home after her treatment. So in the script, back when she got the prescription from the doctor, she actually goes back to the Victory offices to try to get more answers, and this time when she touches it, she wakes up hooked up to a machine with a bunch of 1950s advertisements around her and then like something like plugged into her head. And the dancers she's been having these flashes of are above her on the ceiling. Because Victory isn't just a community that's hiding something, it's not real. But then she tried to get up, not realizing that her legs wouldn't be able to handle the weight anymore, and she hits her head and then she's back in the simulation. And I like that it showed that to us earlier in the script, even if the reprogramming works for a bit, because it actually added more tension to us knowing and gave us more time to potentially learn some of those like nitty-gritty details. But the movie just seemed way too concerned about keeping so much of that mystery like locked in a box. But now we know that literally none of this is real. So the eggs without the yolks are simulation error, the plane is a glitch, the window closing in on her, you get it. The saran wrap might have been a little bit more confusing, but I kind of think that it was like her subconscious just trying to kill herself in the simulation so that she would wake up in the real world. I think for some of the glitches, people are looking for them to specifically be addressed, but they don't really need to be once you know that none of this is real. But this is all something happening in a shared simulation. And if the brain starts misfiring something, it's going to play that way as if it's actually happening. So I also assume that the earthquakes that keep happening are a result of like the tiny changes being implemented into the simulation. So for me, the issue isn't those little things being unanswered, it's this over-reliance on repetitive visuals while taking way too long to get where it's going. But back to the movie, she's reset and it seems like she's actually forgotten everything until Jack starts singing the song she'd been humming the whole movie, the one he was singing to her in reality.
With you all the time. With you all the time. I want to be with you all the time.
Yeah, no subtlety with those lyrics. And it makes her flash back to everything that happened. Jack knocking her out, applying for the Victory Project, being approved with his chosen wife. So basically the Victory Project is choosing a woman, knocking her out, keeping her in a comatose state in a virtual reality simulation where you go most of the time, but then for like 8 hours a day, you have to go to the real world to work, to pay to be there. All packaged with the message that this is the way things are supposed to be.
What did you do?
Though I really like how they specified that his chosen nationality was British so he wouldn't have to try maintaining an American accent. It's so good. So she's now fully aware of what he did to her. She's super pissed, but he thinks he saved her because she worked all the time.
You were so unhappy. You hated your life.
It was my life. You don't get to take that from me.
I gave this to you.
Oh no, he's trying to mirror the Florence face. But he starts making the argument that he has to spend so much time being miserable, making money in the real world, and she just gets to spend all of her time in victory, happy. It's easier. And this is where the moral messaging of the movie starts to feel a little bit twisted. While it is a bit clunky, the original script makes Jack more abusive, controlling, and entitled, and lets us know that Alice is super unsatisfied with this way of life, even without Jack's behavior. She wants to go back to school. She wants a job. She's frequently annoyed by his entitlement and unhappy with a life where she's essentially an accessory to attend events with when she's not cleaning and cooking. Then this movie turns around and doesn't really make a solid argument for why anyone should be unhappy with this way of life.
You get to stay here, and you're happy.
It really feels like the only issue presented is the circumstances in which they got that way of life. And that's weird and kind of plays into the idea of like, oh, women would just be happier if they went back to the way things used to be. Which I know wasn't their intention, but it's like they wouldn't let Harry Styles be an asshole. But let's close out the movie before I dive into more thoughts. Because he won't let her go and she can't breathe, she ends up slamming a glass into his head, which kills him in the real world. Unlike the women, the men can't be reset. But instead of spending any time exploring any of those interesting ideas, the last 15 minutes of this just completely get blown off an edge. And while the whole movie's had an air of disorganization and messiness, this is a total mess. Frank is told that Jack's dead and everyone moves to grab Alice, but Bunny gets there first. And she reveals that she knows everything because she chose the victory life. She said she lost her kids in the real world, and even though she knows these ones are fake, they're real to her. Okay, Scarlet Witch. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. I feel like if she realized what was happening and then chose to stay, that could have been interesting. But her always knowing and actively choosing it feels like it undermines what the story is going for. Though I guess it could kind of speak to the woman who would gladly take trade-offs in exchange for this life. That she's content to live in a flawed system because it benefits her, and Alice is supposed to be the one brave enough to question that system. We're just gonna totally ignore Margaret over here. But either way, she's helping Alice escape. Damn, she's strong. Then it just turns into a stupid action segment car chase scene with people trying to stop her from getting to the exit portal, but all the women seemingly become aware of what's actually happening. I assume that it's because it's a shared reality. When one person breaks through so thoroughly it reflects in on the other inhabitants. Like how Alice thought she saw a plane crash after seeing Margaret holding a toy plane. And then for some reason Frank doesn't lift a finger to stop her from leaving. It's his simulation. You figure they could do something, and you also assume that they must know where she's in the real world so someone could just like tap out and go kill her. Like if you really wanted to infuse action, that could have been an interesting way to do it. But instead it's just comical cartoon shit like this.
Stop her, you idiots!
Stop her, you idiots! It's an entire desert. You can drive in any direction. Like, I get that everyone who isn't a husband or the doctor is literally just a program bot, but like, come on. And then Shelley stabs Frank.
Stupid man.
Like, was she fully aware and just waiting for her time, or did she snap out of it in that moment? Because it kind of seemed like she did. She seems like the type of character who manages to gain power in this type of society by aligning herself to the ringleader and putting up with like these social and power imbalances, basically making the best of the existing system because it benefits her. But then she says it's her turn. It's like, her turn to what? Run the simulation, the victory company? Doesn't this all really fall apart without Frank? Or did she literally mean like, it's my turn to kill you following Alice killing Jack? I don't know, it's messy, besties. The original script seemed a lot cleaner here, which we'll get to. Like, look at this. What is this? It's comedy. But she obviously makes it the exit portal, but she kind of like lingers for some reason. Then imagines Jack.
Don't leave me.
Sorry, Jackie boy, you're fucking dead.
You and me.
Always.
You and me, which is like a unit versus his earlier you love me. I don't like it. I don't get it. I get that she's mourning the loss of what she thought she had, but walk through. Whatever. She manages to just make it through. Everything starts to disappear. Her real memories start to come through. And then we hear her gasping for a breath before we cut to credits. Okay, in some ways I get why a hard cut there is fun, but I wanted so much more. You dumped all the interesting information in like under 5 minutes in the last 20 minutes of a 2-hour movie. I wanted to see her wake up in her body and see the state of her body and the tragedy there. More on the process of Jack getting into the Victory Project, how he was radicalized and how monstrous his actions were. I get wanting to build the mystery and the mystique of what's happening, but you've got weird glitches happening within the first 10 minutes. We already know reality is frickered. You could have shown us that it's a simulation at the halfway mark, which would align more with the scripts, and then just kind of have her be reprogrammed so that it adds like more attention to us. Could have done some small fun Easter eggs that like you could look back on and be like, oh my god, that was a sign. Like the revised script specifically makes a point to say that Alice washes her hands methodically like a surgeon. The original has her flat out mention that she had a dream where she was performing surgery. We even have a moment in the revised script where she accidentally cuts her hand and like snaps into doctor mode and like stitches herself up. But let's dive into those scripts for a second. While the two versions of the script do have a lot of differences, they end fairly similar. Picking up with a full realization of what happened to her, the original script is a lot more brutal, like she shoves a broomstick up his ass in revenge after drugging him, because not only did he do this to her, he's an abusive asshole and gaslights her way harder. She basically finds out that he did this to her after she filed for divorce and he couldn't handle her success. Then ends up stabbing him in the head a bunch with a screwdriver after narrowly escaping him doing the same to her in a lobotomy attempt. Very violent and very in line with the type of person who would be willing to do this to someone he claimed to love. Then in the revised script, she again drugs him after her reprogramming fails, and we actually get to see her say, or hear her say, "Don't worry, darling, it's just the sedative you've been trying to force down my throat." Then she purposely knocks him out with the tumbler before beating him to death with a golf club. Why couldn't we have that? Or something like that? Just some kind of moment of decisiveness and actual choice, not just an accidental murder. You might think that's a little bit too brutal for what we've built up into this movie, but it makes a lot of sense in the revised script. So the scene where she's leaving the hospital, someone starts talking to her in the elevator, a pharmaceutical rep that she's never paid much attention to, who says things like, "You work too hard. You need someone to take care of you." And it's not until she leaves the elevator that we see that it's Jack. They weren't even together in the revised script. He just decided that he wanted her to be his wife. Way scarier, way more chilling. Big fan of that. It is implied that some of the other women in the movie would be in this scenario, but not Alice. She just gets the misguided boyfriend who lost his job and wanted her around all the time. I don't know what made them decide to flip this more into a romance, but it makes the morals get really muddy, like even compared to the original script where they were originally together but the marriage fell apart. It makes Jack feel more like a puppet for Frank. Someone just swept up in the promises of a better life, but you know, he strapped her to a bed and faked her death. So the weird focus on how devoted he is to her just feels off. I get that there's an interesting dynamic of this being someone that she did care about doing this to her, or at least at one point cared about her, but the movie just doesn't explore that well. And something that I don't think the movie really pointed out is that the men get promotions based on how many people they can recruit in, like an MLM.
Well, Jack better recruit somebody soon.
Please, Dean says Jack's about to get promoted.
So Jack getting that major promotion into Frank's inner circle means that he's likely doomed a bunch of women, some of whom don't even know the men that are doing this to them, to the same fate. So this weird thing where it tries to make Jack seem almost sympathetic because he can't provide for Alice in the modern world feels really weird and doesn't make sense. It's like they tried to step away from this by showing that he's now this like scraggly dirtbag because he just doesn't care about his real life self. But like the focus of wanting to provide for her doesn't make sense because he can't just cook food when she's been working for 30 hours.
I wasn't sure what you wanted and you never text me back.
Because he doesn't want to provide for her in a way that's helpful. He wants dominion over her because he's unsatisfied with his life. He needs to provide in the manly ways. But you know what? Cooking for your hardworking woman is hella manly. And I feel like both of the scripts got that message across better. And then there's so much going on with Frank as this person offering the alternative, the salvation to a traditional lifestyle. Specifically a world where the women will be what you want them to be. But we don't spend enough time with him either, which is super unfortunate because he's this whole other layer of like demanding and absolute control and dominance. Like the best comment we get out of Frank is when he says,
And yet here you are, preparing dinner like a good girl.
And it's the way he says it that lets you know everything you need to know about him. This isn't a world he wants to create out of love and a genuine belief in those traditional values of gender roles where you can still be a team. It's about subservience. The revised script literally starts with a voiceover of Frank's elevator pitch for victory and then like mentioning brotherhood, and they just don't use it. So I just enjoy the harsher stance that the scripts take on Jack's actions. In this one, we almost don't even know what Alice would have ended up doing if Jack hadn't freaked out and squeezed her.
We're perfect in here. I don't have to lie to you anymore.
I just need a second. I just need a second.
Now, in terms of how it ends in both versions, she ends up in a psychiatric ward. In the original script, they really seem to stress the idea of her questioning her sanity and being like an unreliable narrator to us, like whether or not this has all been a hallucination, because when she kills him, it's supposed to be in the modern real world, which is actually 2050 in the script. But then when she wakes up, she's back in the 50s and they've sent her to a mental hospital. But in both versions, Bunny shows up to tell her where another exit portal is. In the OG script, it's still kind of unsure if it's a hallucination because she's just told it's right behind her. And I actually like that they didn't go in the direction of making her seem like an unreliable narrator in this movie. Like there's like hints of it, but you're kind of like, it feels like pretty early on you know that something actually is wrong. And then in the revised script, Bunny drives her to the end of the desert or the end of the simulation and says that jumping off the cliff will send her back, but that she wants to stay because of her kids. So she jumps and it doesn't specify what happens to her, and then it cuts to Frank's voiceover again, but now it's showing that Victory has tripled in size, meaning that regardless of what happened to Alice, Victory is prospering. And as doomer as that ending is, I kind of like it. These kind of ideas are always growing and people are always preying on people who feel lost. Not literally the idea of knocking people out and trapping them in a virtual reality, but the grift of preying on the people who are upset with their place in life and looking for any answers. As unreasonable as those answers may be, depending on who they find. But I guess the movie just didn't want to end on that note and really wanted to make it seem like Frank just completely lost without really giving us any satisfying conclusion there. Now, the other area where I feel there is a very big disconnect between the message of this movie and the statements about the movie is in Olivia Wilde's comments about the sexuality of the film. How she was looking to focus on female pleasure and bring empowerment there. But that's a really fucked up thing to say when all the sex in this movie is non-consensual. We all know the R word I want to use there, but YouTube. This is a woman forcibly put into a simulation with all agency taken away from her. Her brain is literally programmed to be a happy little housewife, to forget every goal, aspiration, and achievement she's ever made in her life. And it is absolutely not made any better by the fact that they had a relationship in the real world. I understand Wilde's very accurate point that there's an issue with female pleasure and intimacy in movies in regards to sex scenes, especially those with heterosexual couples. And particularly in America, and all these scenes are usually focused and framed around male pleasure. It's just that a movie where women are strapped into beds and forced to live this fake life was absolutely not the place to explore the power of female sexuality. If anything, the entitled nature of these men should have come full force in those moments. It should have played into those stereotypes. I think a lot of the criticism surrounding Wilde has gone like way overboard, but this was not the place to girl boss sex. And that really sucks because I remember watching interviews with the Booksmart cast and they talked about how they really appreciated how Wilde handled those more delicate, intimate scenes, and it's honestly just shocking that this was her follow-up. Obviously, there are some other changes from the script. Like I said, the original one was very different. Like the exit portals always seem to move around to different areas. Jack does talk about his job, and he's talking about how they're like using computers to develop things, and how if they can simulate board games, imagine what else they could simulate. So they're like really putting some little hinters out there. Though Jack mentioning his work and a simulation could be setting up that it inspired her future delusions. But yeah, those are pretty much all my thoughts on Don't Worry, Darling. I'm sure there's something I'm forgetting, but I've like circled around so many times and realized that I've rewritten like the same things in 5 different spots in the script. So it's probably just better to like, well, we'll just end it here. But let me know what you guys are thinking down below. Like I said, my big issues are just kind of how they express Jack as a character and some of like the issues with the moral framing there. How long it took them to get to the reveal and then not doing enough with it and then just turning it into a stupid 15-minute action segment that I did not want. I don't know if anyone wanted it. But that is going to do it for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching. Thanks as always to my Patreon and YouTube channel members. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Leave a like on the video if you're into that kind of thing. All my social medias are listed down below. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. I'm mostly okay, and we'll catch you all later. Oh, the Black Mirror episode I was thinking, SS Callister.